there. See if it got something you like. There we go. Until I start making strange noises. Okay.
We're glad that you have returned here, and we're going to begin, and I'd like to have a word of prayer before we start. Father in heaven, you have been good to us today. This Sabbath day is a blessing to us, and as we listen this afternoon, keep us attentive. Help us to understand your will for us. In your name, amen.
Amen. Keep us attentive. It's always a challenge after lunch, you know? I understand that. So, this is a topic that I really like. To me, it's kind of what ties things together in a way that makes me think Christianity and Seventh-day Adventism have a chance of really making sense and really doing something. Let's put it that way, you know? And with even that much of an introduction, you know, with any luck at all, and especially if you're seeing the title up there, you're thinking it has something to do with the great controversy, which in fact it does, because to me that's just an absolutely unparalleled advantage that we as Seventh-day Adventists have, is just even having the vaguest of concepts about the great controversy. It explains so much that other Christians struggle with and just kind of flounder around and don't really know what to do with. And so it has been of interest to me for, well, ever since a couple of brain cells started working intelligently back and forth. I don't know, I think I was about 16 or 17 when that first happened. But you know, I've always wanted to understand the great controversy. I've always wanted to understand in a practical way. Let's put it that way. And I am, how can I put this? I am appreciative of a lot of explanations or elaborations on the great controversy that I've heard. But many of them, it has seemed to me, tend to deal at an arm's length level of symbolism, so to speak, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't make any sense, but I always wanted to go a step beyond. I always wanted to see, you know, how does this work on the street? You know, how does this work in the human mind? How does this work in the minds of the universe? Because this great controversy is playing out before the whole universe. And so that's the kind of thing that that I like to look at. Let's put it that way. And it has led me into a lot of interesting areas. Perhaps the most notable of those would be what we might generally refer to as medical missionary work. The more I have come to understand the principles of the great controversy, the more inclined I am to say that the principles involved in medical missionary work are in fact identical to the principles at the very core of the great controversy. And that elevates it, in my mind, to a role that might not first, be readily apparent to just if you were looking at it from coming from a worldly perspective, trying to say, how do you do something together? You wouldn't necessarily see it in the same way that I see it today. So this morning I mentioned Lucifer's loss of faith in God, right? Remember, God said, please do this, and he said, no, I'm going to do that instead, which indicates to me, I don't know any other way to evaluate it, maybe somebody else views it differently, but to me, the only way he could get there was to have lost faith in God's wisdom or his love. And what's really interesting about that is that philosophers of all stripes, and Christian philosophers especially, have long maintained that if in fact there is any supreme being, he must of necessity be possessed of three characteristics. If he's not, you're in trouble. And those characteristics are infinite love, infinite wisdom, and infinite power. And what's interesting is that Lucifer lost his confidence in God's love and wisdom, and he never challenged God's power. You may remember that statement where Ellen White says that, God could cast Lucifer and his angels down as easily as he could drop a pebble to the ground or throw a pebble to the ground. Well, it doesn't take a lot of effort to throw a pebble to the ground. You just kind of have to let go of it. Gravity will do the rest for you. But Lucifer never in heaven challenged God's power. He has challenged it since, but only in a very specific and limited arena. And that's interesting. Hopefully I'll remember to come back to that as we go on. So he challenged his love and his wisdom. And this is borne out in Revelation chapter 12, where it says, and there was war in heaven. The word war in Greek is polemos, which I'm no Greek scholar. I just used up about 1/6 of my Greek vocabulary right there. But polemos is the Greek word from which we get our English word polemic. Now, that's not a real common word in today's, street vocabulary either, I'm afraid. But a polemic, these are perhaps best known from history for the Philippic polemics, okay, where, was it Aristotle? I forget who it was. I don't know, some guy in Greece gave the 3 polemic speeches against King Philip. He kept saying, Philip of Macedon is going to come trash you. You guys got to get ready. And everybody else was like, yeah, I don't know. I think Philip's a nice guy. And the polemic was a pointed, virulent attack on someone else's position. But it's purely mental. That's the thing. And so when John wrote the Revelation, he said there was a polemos. There was a mental war. It never was a war of fisticuffs or cruise missiles or something like that in heaven, because they fought the whole war in heaven and nobody died. It's kind of a strange way to run a war. So Lucifer challenged God's love and his wisdom, or he lost faith in his love and wisdom. He avoided a direct challenge to his power, I presume because even he was not delusional enough to think he could win that one. But then, what came next? And back about 20 years ago, I had a really naive idea. I specialize in dumb ideas sometimes. But I said, I wonder what the argument's over. What's the great controversy over? And so what I did is I put together a huge, monster, big search for the Ellen White CD-ROM thing, if you're familiar with that. This will either make sense or not make sense, but they have Boolean search operators, right? So you can and this or that, but not this, and all that sort of thing, right? Anyhow, so I put together this monster big search that was designed to capture anything that spoke about Lucifer, the archangel, Satan, the chief rebel, the arch rebel, blah, blah, blah. Any name I could think for Satan, any name or term I could think of for God, Christ, heaven, the government of heaven, whatever, anything like that, anything to do with law, Ten Commandments, Decalogue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, anything like that, because I knew the argument was over the law. I already had spirit of prophecy statements to that effect. And then every word I could come up with out of the Roget's thesaurus, right, for accuse, accusation, fault finding, complaint, whatever. I just wanted to know, okay, so what was Lucifer whining about? He started whining in heaven. What was he whining about? So I put together this monster big search, and it came up with something just shy of 150,000 paragraphs to go through, which took me a year. But I went through. I didn't read every word, I admit. I skimmed some. But I was just looking for the accusations. What are we really fighting over? Because in my very simple-minded assessment of things, I imagined it like this. If I say that the car is blue, and Tony out here says the car is red, we could stand in the house all day long hitting each other about the head and neck, arguing about it, or we could walk out to the garage and look at the car. When you go look at the car, it's probably going to be purple. But anyhow, when you go look at the car, you ought to be able to find a way to end the argument. So what was Lucifer's claims? What was he arguing about? What's it going to take to end the argument? That was my whole thought. And so I spent a year going through all those statements, and I originally expected there would be dozens and dozens. Well, you can say the same thing in a bunch of different ways with different words. And so there are probably dozens and dozens of different wordings, but when I started kind of categorizing them, it came down pretty simple. I only come up with 9. So what are the accusations? What are we actually arguing over? Well, arranged as best I can, and there's a little bit of doubt maybe, a little sloppiness to the thing, but going through Ellen White's various accounts, trying to keep it in chronological order, this is what I came up with. The first claim was angels are holy by nature and wise enough to govern themselves so they don't need God's law. We've got this. We're doing fine, thank you. Just leave us alone. It's interesting that as soon as this idea began floating, that's when God called the big assembly meeting and said, Jesus is my son. That was news to the angels, right? That was a surprise to them. I haven't found it anywhere in Ellen White's writings that I would be able to say, this says it exactly. But my strong impression from a few different statements that have kind of circumstantial evidence is that prior to that time, Jesus functioned as an angel among angels, just as he functioned as a man among men when he was on earth. And so Lucifer's second argument, God was unfair when he exalted Jesus above Lucifer. And it kind of comes down to somebody here is going to get a promotion. And Lucifer said, well, there's Jesus, there's me, he's got some good points, I got some good points, pros, cons, whatever. I think I'm the best choice. God didn't agree. Next thing is God is selfish. presumably because he wasn't listening to Lucifer complain about the first two. God is unforgiving and revengeful. God's law is defective and needs to be changed. Now, not in every case, but generally I think it's fair to say that God was responding to these accusations as they came up and denying them. I don't have an explicit statement for every single one that, God said, no, no. But some of them I do, okay? Several of them I do. When it gets down to this number 5, God's law is defective and needs to be changed, God definitely responded to that. And what's interesting is that in all the different ways that Ellen White words it, she never has God say, I will not change the law. God never says, I will not change the law. He always says, the law cannot be changed. There's a subtle difference there. The law is perfect and cannot be changed. Well, this is just my imagining, so take it for only that value. But I anticipate that the other angels were, forming opinions and analyzing all this as it was rolling out in real time, right? And let's go back to number 3. God is selfish. And there's a couple of different ways of looking at that. You could say, well, why is God, what do you mean God is selfish? He's given us everything we've got. But to play devil's advocate for a moment, you could also say he owns everything in the universe. Let's put a little different color onto it, Is God selfish? He owns everything in the universe. And, nobody else has total control over anything. Everything's under God. And so I could see the angels, they're wrestling with these things. They'd never had anybody lie to them before. How do you process this? Well, God's law is defective and needs to be changed. I imagine that the angels, somebody would have said, what's really wrong with it, Lucifer? I mean, it's like that's what we've been doing forever. What's wrong with it? It's interesting that Ellen White says that Lucifer could not point to any specific defect. He didn't have an argument. Nor could he point to any, what's the wording? He could not point to anything that would be better, except to say that if God changes the law, it'll be better. He wasn't even suggesting that the speed limit go from 60 to 65. He was just change the law. It's kind of strange that way. Well, when he gets down to here to number 6, neither angels nor human beings can obey God. Of course, human beings weren't created yet, so that aspect comes in later, of course. But he said, nobody can obey the law. And again, I'm thinking that the angels would have said, we've been obeying the law forever. And it's just kind of intriguing to, and this is all speculation. Don't hang anything on this, but what could Lucifer say to that? Well, there are a number of things he could say, perhaps. He could say, you just don't understand where it's going. He could imply that the law is going to be, evolving into something else. He could have said that. He could say, excuse me, I am like the highest of all the angels. I know more about the government than you do. Trust me, you can't keep it. Could have said that. He might have even claimed, you've already broken it. I don't know. But he was claiming that nobody could keep it. Okay? Number 7 is probably the most fascinating of the batch. He said God's law is arbitrary. Now, this one's a little bit vague and ambiguous until you break it down. The root concept of the claim arbitrary is because I said so. An arbitrary requirement is one that is made on someone's some individual or some governing body, perhaps, Congress or something, whatever, or the State House or City Hall or whatever it is, City Council. Some individual or group just makes a decision and says, this is what the law is. That's an arbitrary law. The word has some other connotations and some other applications and things. It can carry other colors of meaning, so to speak. But the root idea is, it is what it is just because you said that's what it is. And God had been saying, especially after number 5, God was saying the law cannot be changed. Cannot be changed. It's impossible to change the law. And so Lucifer says, that's stupid. The law is arbitrary. It is what it is because you said, this is what the law is. Just say something different. We're tired of driving at 60, make it 65. Nobody's going to complain. We all think it's a great idea. Just say something new. And God's response was, the law is perfect and cannot be changed. And at that point, and I have no indication of this, whether Lucifer was knowingly trying to steer the debate to this point, or if he felt just all of a sudden he had a godsend literally fall in his lap, I don't know. But there's a very strong relationship between number 7 and number 8, and you have to consider them together, or number 8 makes no sense whatsoever. Because number 8 is God's law makes forgiveness impossible. You've read that. I mean, if you've read the Spirit of Prophecy much, you've stumbled into that. Lucifer claimed that it was impossible to forgive sinners. But that's really a dumb idea, the way we normally think of forgiveness. Forgiveness simply depends on the magnanimity and the generosity of the wronged party, right? You can forgive anybody you want to forgive. But Lucifer is making a very calculated argument here. He says, the law is arbitrary. God, you can change it anytime you want to. And God says, it cannot be changed. And Lucifer comes back with his counterpunch. He says, if you can't change it, you can't control it. You can't stop the punishment. There's no way anybody can be forgiven. That's the only way I've ever been able to make any sense out of this. The law makes forgiveness impossible argument. What's interesting is that argument right there, number 8, is the one that Lucifer goes to after the close of probation. That's the argument that Ellen White cites him as using. Thou canst not in justice, O God, forgive them. They sinned, I sinned. You're going to punish me, but you're not going to punish them. You can't do that. And in fact, there's a statement two statements, where Ellen White very specifically says that Lucifer sought to get Adam and Eve to sin because he knew how much God loved them. And he said, if they sin, he will find a way to forgive them, and that means he's going to have to change his law. And if he changes his law, I win the whole argument. And that was definitely in the motivations of Lucifer's attack on Adam and Eve. Okay, and then the final argument is a foregone conclusion. He had to say, God's lying. Okay, because God had differed with him on the first 8, the only way to explain it is God's lying, right? Okay, so those are the accusations. If you're God, what are you going to do? How do you deal with that? And I want to introduce a little concept, a particular fallacy from the realm of formal logic. If you've ever studied into logical fallacies, some of them are kind of cute, so to speak. And there's one that's called poisoning the well. That's the name of the fallacy. And it works like this. Suppose we've got two gentlemen running for mayor of Spokane or something. So here I am, I'm candidate A, and over here I'm candidate B, and we get together for one of those, city, civic hall, whatever debate type of things, okay? So candidate A gets 10 minutes, and the other guy gets 10 minutes, and this guy gets, and they have this whole thing set up with however they want to proceed with their debate. So candidate A stands up, and the first thing he says is, ladies and gentlemen, it's so nice of you to have come out for this civic opportunity. It speaks well of your involvement and intelligence. Always you flatter the audience first. And then he says, but before we really get into the heart of this whole thing, there's something I have to share with you about my opponent, candidate B. Candidate B is a notorious liar. You cannot believe anything that he says. That right there is poisoning the well. If this guy has any credibility in your mind, all of a sudden you don't know if you can believe anything that this guy says. Make sense? Once that accusation of dishonesty has been dropped into the waters, so to speak, of the well, this candidate is rendered utterly impotent with words. Anything he says can be discounted because he might be lying. That reduces him, or perhaps in some cases elevates him, to making his case through something other than words. That's exactly where God found himself. So let's jump from the time of Lucifer's rebellion, we're jumping down 4,000 years to the, probably not in the first statement or two here. God's purpose is to place things upon an eternal basis of security. Time must be given for Satan to develop the principles which were the foundation of his government. The heavenly universe must see worked out the principles which Satan declared were superior to God's principles. God's order must be contrasted with Satan's order. The corrupting principles of Satan's rule must be revealed. The principles of righteousness expressed in God's law must be demonstrated as unchangeable, perfect, eternal. Now, I'm going to challenge a fondly held perception here, and that is we like to tell our children, God can do anything. In actual fact, there are a lot of things God cannot do, by his own admission. And right here we're going to see not only are there things that God cannot do, there are things that God is constrained to do. We sometimes have this idea that God's kind of, freestyle skiing. He can do whatever he wants. But no, if you take a look there, in order to prosecute the great controversy, there are a number of things that God has to do. Without them, he will lose the great controversy. And what's interesting is to notice the nature of the requirements here. The principles of Satan must be developed. The heavenly universe must see these other principles. Those are still Satan's principles, okay? God's order must be contrasted. Satan's rule must be revealed. God's law must be demonstrated. If you look at the way this war is being prosecuted, it's entirely a matter of perception, comprehension, and perception. Everything here assumes an intelligent universe that can take in information and form intelligent decisions. I think that's important because I'd like to be a part of the intelligent universe rather than the one that we're running here, which doesn't always strike me as that intelligent. Let's put it that way. So I strive to be able to process the information in the great controversy here. Okay, let's go on. The unfallen world saw that the character of God could be vindicated only through this trial and conflict of the two forces. The attributes of God must be made to appear. This is all perception and comprehension. It's a polemos. It's not fisticuffs. Of the stability of his government, there must be no question. How important is this? Well, yeah, look at it here. Without the correct knowledge of God, the human family would be divested of all divine strength. Stop for a moment. What does divested mean? We said stripped. That's a pretty good synonym. Yeah. It would be taken from them. They would be relieved of it. It's actually the opposite of invested, where something comes in, this is something going out, okay? They would be divested of all divine strength. What do you think your odds are there? That's a very grim place for a human being to be. With false attributes kept before the mind as belonging to God, the human family would be the dupes of satanic lies and the subjects of satanic agencies. And he could practice upon their credulity with success. This is a great paragraph for a dropout from the 3rd grade. I love the vocabulary. What is a dupe? A fool. It's not a bad synonym. What's that? A rube? Is that what you said? That's cute. That's kind of it. Do you know where the term dupe comes from? Are you familiar with the adjective duplicitous? So duplicity, the noun, is lying. It's two-facedness, actually. Dupe, same as double. It's two-faced. To one group I say this, but to another group I say that. So if I am lying, I am being duplicitous, and if you fall for it, you are my dupe. It's a good word. Hang on to that one. That's worth 25 cents right there. And look on the last line. Practice upon their credulity with success. That's another fine vocabulary word. What is credulity? What would we use as a synonym for that in our modern vernacular? Credibility, incredibility almost, and I know you can construct that one both back and forth. It's kind of weird. We might also say, I've forgotten the word right now. What's the word I want? Gullibility. What were you saying, Magda? Belief. Oh, belief, yeah. Yeah, they will be too credulous. They give credit where it is not due. That's the root of credulous or incredulity, is to give credit to something that doesn't deserve it. All this, if we don't understand God. Okay? Do you see why the accusations of Lucifer against the character of God and the government of God are actually a pretty big deal? Let's go on. The great object that brought Christ to the earth was to reveal the Father. There's a logic to that. The attack was to obscure or misrepresent God. Appropriate, intelligent response is to paint the true picture. It's kind of simple. I like that. I'm a pretty simple guy, really, at heart. The whole purpose, how much? The whole purpose of Jesus' own mission on earth was to set men right through the revelation of God. We seldom think of it in that light. If we were going to be all intellectual about this, we would say that the revelation of God has an affective element to it. It's changing us. The goal is to set men and ladies right through the revelation of God. Theologically, I think you're going to find a certain hesitancy to deal with that because Christian orthodoxy and largely Adventist orthodoxy is very much opposed to a concept known as the moral influence theory. And some people would see elements of moral influence theory in that phrasing of Ellen White right there. but it's still there. I'll just point that out. She wrote that one, not me. Going on. When the object of his mission was attained, I'm having too much fun being an English teacher here. What's that thing right after the word attained? Oh, before the revelation. An M dash. Who said that? Kudos to you. Nicely done. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an M dash. Do you know why it's called that? You must be a topographer. It's the same width as a capital M. Okay? Now, so just because I think it's worth knowing, in English we use 3 different kinds of dashes. There's the little short ones called hyphens. Do you know what we use hyphens for? Hyphenating words. That's what we use hyphens for. It's to hyphenate words. Then there's one that's a little longer. Do you know what that one's called? It's an N dash. You are a topographer. It's the same width as a capital N. Not an M, but an N, right? Do you know what you use that one for? Nope. Nope. That's the least commonly understood one. The N dash is always used as a replacement for the word to. So, January, N dash, March. A, N dash, Z. Okay, it's always used as an abbreviation for the word to. And then we have M dashes. And M dashes are used to set off elements of a sentence in a couple of different kinds of constructions. This one's known as an apostrophic construction. When the object of his mission was attained, dash, M dash, the revelation of God to the world, M dash. Now that section right there, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? 6 words between the M dashes is the restatement of the subject of the sentence. It's the same as if I said, Tom, comma, Fred's brother, comma, went to town. Fred's brother is the same as Tom. That's just being set off with commas. You could set it off with M dashes, but it doesn't quite fit. That's okay. So here, that's what's going on here. When the object of Jesus' mission was attained, the revelation of God to the world, the Son of God announced that his work was accomplished and that the character of the Father was made manifest to man. So here's my question after all of that. Sorry, I appreciate your patience. What was the announcement? When was the announcement? It is finished. Because the revelation of the character of the Father could not be complete without the sacrifice of the cross. Because the character of God is to give, to sacrifice, to suffer, to do anything for the benefit of the other. And so Jesus, in his final breath, said, it's finished. In all his ministry, all his self-denial and self-sacrifice, Christ's object was to reveal God to the world. Well, why would it have to be in self-denial and self-sacrifice? Because that's what God's like. It's like, you can't reveal God by, partying and getting drunk. That doesn't reveal God, okay? That's just not the character of God. The character of God is, as the Bible puts it very succinctly, love. Love such as it's willing to deny self and sacrifice self for others' benefit. Remember the poisoning the well problem. This is exactly where God was. No verbal description could reveal God to the world, because he might be lying. Through a life of purity, a life of perfect trust and submission to the will of God, a life of humiliation such as even the highest seraph in heaven would have shrunk from, God himself must be revealed to humanity, not described to humanity. There's a difference. Jesus could not express in words to the understanding of man the love of the Father. He could only say, and then she quotes John 3:16. That's the closest you can come with words to revealing the character of the Father. But they're insufficient. They don't do the job. Fortunately, the paragraph goes on. But he did express the love of God in his actions. That's the only way it could be done. Because words were suspect, God having been accused of lying. So, after the crucifixion, where does the great controversy stand? That's a key point. The crucifixion, well, the life, ministry, death of Christ were a huge element in the divine response to Lucifer's accusations. So, what's the scorecard look like right after Jesus ascended to heaven, say? Oops, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Because he could only reveal God in his actions, it makes sense that he would devote more time and labor to healing the afflicted of their maladies than to preaching. Okay? Jesus was smart. You put your money where you get the most bang for the buck, right? You put your effort where you're going to get the best benefit. Now, he did preach a few sermons. Preaching's not all bad. I've occasionally stooped to it myself. But, no, I shouldn't even say that. Preaching is a part of God's plan. But it's not a sufficient, by itself, part of God's plan, okay? The way I like to put that is that, see if I can get this straight in my head here. Proclamation is the explanation of the demonstration. Does that make sense? You demonstrate the character of God, and then you preach about it to make sure people get the point. Okay? Proclamation is the explanation of the demonstration. And then you can flip that around, and you can say, proclamation without demonstration is just imagination. And that's, yeah, that's true. And so I would register my concern that to an unfortunately large degree, we have sought to preach our way to the second coming. And that will never happen. It is going to require actions. Okay, so here we are. Here are the accusations now. After Christ's life and ministry, we just go through these here real quickly here. Angels are holy, and they got everything under control. And I'm going to be putting words in Gabriel's mouth simply because he's the only angel in heaven that I know by name. Gabriel would look at Lucifer and say, your angelic nature did not prevent you from just killing the innocent Son of God. I don't think that's a good argument. Number two, God was unfair when he exalted Jesus above Lucifer. Oh, because you're actually better than Jesus. You have more advantages than he has after you've killed him as the only innocent being who ever has or ever will die was Jesus. Let me make a brief diversion. Desire of Ages is a great paragraph in the chapter, It Is Finished. It's on the right-hand page, but I can never remember the page number. Sorry. But it says that through the crucifixion, Lucifer had revealed himself as a murderer. And then a little bit later on in the paragraph, or maybe the next paragraph, it says that this cut the last link of sympathy between heaven and Lucifer. And I'm scratching my head and I'm saying, at the cross, Lucifer revealed himself as a murderer. What about Cain and Abel? What about how many million other murders had taken place in the first 4,000 years of Earth's history? Did they not count And no, they didn't. Because Lucifer had a legal dodge. I'm putting words in his mouth, but I think it's valid. He could always say, don't blame me. It's God's law that says sinners have to die. You can quibble about how they die if you want, I mean, maybe you'd rather we use the firing squad or hang them or use lethal injection or a gas chamber or whatever other creative means we have of killing people. But God said they have to die. It's his law. I told you it was a bad law. Don't blame me. And apparently that worked for 4,000 years. Or something maybe more sophisticated. I would not in any sense doubt the devil's ability to be more sophisticated than I might represent him. But at the cross, he revealed himself as a murderer. It says that his disguise was torn away. Okay. Number 3, God is selfish. Seriously, Lucifer, you're going to make that claim after the cross. It's not working. God is unforgiving and revengeful. No, not working. Just these claims are now so utterly absurd after the example on the life of and ministry of Christ. God's law is defective and needs to be changed. Right at this point, I often like to illustrate this by explaining to, most people and most audiences that I speak to, they don't actually know me personally, and so I will tell them that, on the side, one of my side interests is weightlifting, and that I can actually bench press 400 pounds. And it's always fun to watch the response of people when I say that, and you can pretty quickly judge their understanding of a few things. Let's put it that way, okay? There are a few trusting souls who might say, oh, wow, that's impressive. There are a few people who, of course, are just going to sit there and have absolutely no idea whatsoever. And then there's going to be a few in every audience that go, I don't think so. Because it doesn't take a great deal of expertise in the topic to look at my somewhat scrawny physique and recognize that I probably cannot actually bench press 400 pounds. I have no idea what I can bench press. I've never bench pressed anything in my life, to be honest, so I don't know whether it's 80 or 60 or 120. I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure it's not 400. But if I had seriously made the claim, and you had all scoffed at me, would it not be the sweetest of all vindications to say, oh, bring out the bench, bring out the bar, put on the weights, and do it? Yeah. There's a technical name for that. It's called na. There is nothing so sweet as doing that which was claimed you could not do. And on number 5 and 6, Jesus, with his undoubtedly greater level of dignity and decorum, was probably not saying na, but nonetheless, he'd done it. The argument is dead, Lucifer. Not only did he keep the law, he kept it as a human. That's deep. Okay. The first 6 arguments are gone. They're history. They're toast. There are still 3 on the table. I think that's important. The sad news is that the vast majority of our theological firepower is being used trying to fight the first 6 that have already been settled. And sometimes, unfortunately, some of the theological firepower is being used on those first 6 to try and wave a white flag after Jesus already won the victory. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe that's too obscure an illustration. I'm saying those issues are done. We are to accept the victory on those issues. It's time to move on because we still have 3 to deal with. This is where the battle lies today. Every eye in the unfallen universe is bent upon those who profess to be Christ's followers. How would we say that bent part in the modern vernacular? Every eye is focused. That's a good one. Yeah. Is watching. Okay. The unfallen universe. Sorry. There's a lot of galaxies out there. I remember 40 years ago, somebody running some math on the presumed number of galaxies at that point and estimating how many stars. There's, roughly, say, about an average of 600 million stars per galaxy, and there's, X number of galaxies. You add that all up and divide by 7 billion. How many galaxies are watching you? And back in the day when we still, I'm sure the numbers are higher now, but back, I don't know, I think it was like 150 galaxies watching each individual if the attention of the universe is spread evenly through the population of the Earth. That's something to think about every now and then. There might be somebody watching you. You got 150 galaxies out there that's possibly watching you, yeah. Okay. Every eye in the unfallen universe is bent upon those who profess to be Christ's followers. Here, in this atom of a world, an earnest warfare is going on. A battle in which Christ, our substitute and surety, has engaged in our behalf and conquered. The first 6. He conquered. Those are done. But there's something kind of internally inconsistent and a little bit weird here. The universe is watching us. Why would they watch us when Jesus is the one who did the cool stuff? If I were condemned to watch television, I would rather watch reruns of a good program than an endless supply of really rotten programs, even though they're new. Why would the universe not be watching reruns of Jesus rather than watching people like you and me? The paragraph continues. Now we, Christ's purchased possession, must become soldiers of his cross and conquer in our own behalf on our own account. And for anyone who has the Spirit Prophecy, either the CD-ROM or the app, I encourage you sometime, just when you have nothing else to do a search for those phrases, own behalf or on our own behalf and on our own account. Just look those up. You'll be surprised how often they crop up. We must become soldiers of his cross and conquer in our own behalf on our own account through the power and wisdom given us from above. The influence of the cross, this is the affective element of the cross, it changes things, it does things, right, is to vanquish every earthly and spiritual evil power. And we need to know the plan of the battle that we may work in harmony with Christ. That's what I've been after all my life. I want to know the plan of the battle. What are we doing here? Where do we go? Is there some place we should be aiming our artillery, or should we just continue shooting it at random? Let's go on. So now we've jumped about 2,000 years, not quite, 1,800 years from Jesus down to early Adventism. 1885 here. Notice the statement about Dr. Kellogg. If Dr. Kellogg will trust himself wholly with God, he, capital H, will give him tact and perception and skill as a practitioner that has seldom been excelled. The Lord will give him grace that he is now ignorant of, and he will see as he has never seen before. He will realize that there is to be an intelligent discarding of all drugs. Skill and knowledge is to be given him, which he is in no case to keep to himself. He is to educate, educate, educate. I was very happy to find this statement. Because even though it had always been sort of a, arm's length philosophical, theoretical question with me, I had been unable to adequately explain all of Ellen White's comments in regard to drugs. There are quite a few very strong statements. You read them and you'd say, "Go, never touch a drug in your life." And then there are some statements that kind of say, well, sometimes you might need them. And then there are statements that I assume the use of drugs, particularly anesthesia. Unless you're a lot more keen on doing surgery without anesthesia than I am, it's impossible to read Ellen White's commendation and recognition of the value of surgery without assuming anesthesia. Now, for what it's worth, the first thoracic surgery in the United States, I don't think it was the United States even at that time yet. I think it was pre-revolution. But the first thoracic surgery in North America was on a lady. They had no anesthesia, and she kept her nerves under control by singing the arias from Handel's Messiah during the surgery. I think our population is a bunch of wimps today. I just don't see a lot of people lining up for that kind of medical service anymore. Somehow we've gotten really, really soft. Anyhow, so nonetheless, this statement helps me understand and put into context the seeming different categories of Ellen White's comments on drugs. Dr. Kellogg was to realize, there's the word, realize there is to be an intelligent discarding of drugs. What would it take to qualify as an intelligent discarding of drugs? Well, let me ask it this way. If you have a particular drug that is the only thing standing between you and death, would it be intelligent to discard that drug? I'm voting no. Feel free to form your own opinion. When you have an equivalent or superior, simpler method, it's nothing but intelligent to get rid of the drug. Okay? If you can come up with something that doesn't have a list of side effects and it works just as well, do it. And it's fascinating that there are many things that those who are skillful in what I refer to as natural remedies or simple remedies or rational remedies. I'll explain that in a second. There are a lot of things that there are simpler, less invasive, less prone to side effect treatments for a lot of things. If you understand how to do that, I recommend that you do it. If you don't know how to stay alive without taking your whatever it is, you probably ought to keep taking your whatever it is. Okay? When I first started talking about this thing in advanced history classes 20, 30 years ago, I would always point my students and I'd say, wouldn't it be cool? Well, I could tell them a story of Dr. Paulson and Dr. Kress, who in 1907 ran a controlled study on the treatment of malaria in Michigan. And at the time, the only treatment for malaria was quinine. And they were working out of the University of Michigan. There was a gentleman there, another physician, who was a strong quinine advocate and also an expert microscopist. I think I got that right. Yeah, works with a microscope, which is how you diagnose malaria, right? You go looking for the plasmodium swimming around in the blood. Kress and Paulson didn't like quinine because they'd been conditioned by their reading of the Spirit of Prophecy to stay away from drugs when they could. And so they developed a hydrotherapy regimen where they would take the temperature, and as soon as the temperature started to spike, they'd put the guy in hot packs, and they'd go through the whole treatment. And once or twice, 1 or 2 days of that, and they would break the malaria. And all of their patients, this whole summer long, they were going, patient A, patient B, patient A, patient B, whatever, Dr. A, Dr. B type of thing. They were doing a randomized controlled study, more or less. And all summer long, they had success and no side effects. And the guy over here who was verifying the cases with his own microscope was using the quinine, and he had people who died, people who were blind, people who were deaf, and people who were affected mentally as the side effects. Because the thing with quinine is that if you administer the quinine and you get it to this level in the bloodstream, it'll kill the plasmodium. But if you get it to this level in the bloodstream, it'll kill the patient. So it's kind of like, yeah, you got a little bit of a target there. You're trying to get not to go too far, okay? And so I would point to that, and I'd say, isn't that cool? That's pretty cool to be able to not end up with people who are blind, deaf, and mentally retarded or dead. And then I would break the bad news to them. In the United States, we have a kind of malaria that was caused by Plasmodium vivax. And in the tropical regions of the world, they deal with a malaria that's caused by Plasmodium falciparum. And if you do the hydrotherapy thing on the falciparum patient, he'll die. It wasn't effective. It did nothing. They didn't always die, but it did nothing for falciparum. It worked for vivax, but it didn't work for falciparum. And so I would say, isn't that kind of a cool opportunity? I mean, there's, what, 1 million people or whatever the number is, I don't know, but there's a whale of a lot of folks who die every year, especially little kids, from tropical malaria. Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, if you were the guy who invented the simple means to save all those people, wouldn't that be cool? And I used that illustration for years, and then they did it. They found a shrub. You make tea with the stuff, and it cures about 90% of tropical malaria cases quite quickly. You may have heard of it recently. The shrub is Artemisia, yeah. Sweet wormwood? What's the... Sweet wormwood, yeah, sweet wormwood. And that's actually where ivermectin comes from, isn't it? Yeah, it's related to ivermectin. Ivermectin is just a preparation that comes from that. And so as soon as this was announced, we've got this tea you can drink, the medical world immediately split into two categories. There were a bunch of simple-minded, clueless folks like myself who said, cool, plant shrubs, teach them how to make tea. And of course, the more intelligent folks, they said, we really ought to break this down and figure out what the active ingredient is so that we can standardize it, put it in a pill, and patent it, and make a lot of money. Okay, so that was kind of a side trip. This is Dr. Kellogg, okay? This is Dr. God had great things in mind for Dr. Kellogg. I don't have all the statements. I have a whole raft of statements. God says, he is my physician. You should honor him. Ellen White wrote to him and said, you stand in a very responsible position, standing as you do as the greatest physician on earth. She wrote that to Kellogg. So he was kind of a special guy. You go through the Bible, and there's Abraham, and there's Noah and Moses and David, and some people just stand out a little bit more than others. Kellogg was one of those. Well, in 1888, they had the Ministerial Institute General Conference session held at Minneapolis. You may be familiar with this if you're into the 1888 Righteousness by Faith, Jones Wagner, Law and Galatians, all of that stuff. This is that occasion, okay? Jones and Wagner were preaching the message of righteousness by faith. Kellogg was present. And 15 years later, Ellen White referred to it. She says, after the meeting at Minneapolis, Dr. Kellogg was a converted man. And we all knew it. We could see the converting power of God working in his heart and life. Okay, I should speed up here. I'm having too much fun. It's going to take too long. Okay, so my immediate question was, so what had changed? I mean, if he's converted, I mean, it's not like he's a new Adventist. He'd been an Adventist since his teenage years. He'd been in 1888, he'd already been the medical director of the sanitarium for 12 years. It's not like he's a new Adventist. But now he's converted. And so what's different? We could see it. We could see the converting power of God in his life. So I went looking. I said, well, what's different about the guy? It's not real technical. He started being nice to people. Which is appropriate. When the believer is justified because of the merit of Christ, he is not free to work on righteousness. Faith works by love and purifies the soul. Faith buds and blossoms and bears a harvest of precious fruit. Where faith is, good works appear. The sick are visited, the poor are cared for, the fatherless and the widows are not neglected, the naked are clothed, the destitute are fed. That's what converted people do. And Kellogg was converted. Faith in Jesus Christ as our personal Savior, the one who pardons our sins and transgressions, the one who is able to keep us from sin and lead us in his footsteps, is set forth in the 58th chapter of Isaiah. Now, you may or may not recognize that, but Isaiah 58 is the great medical missionary chapter. That's the deal your bread to the hungry and all that stuff chapter, right? Here are presented the fruits of a faith that works by love and purifies the soul from selfishness. Faith and works are here combined. Thy righteousness shall go before thee. What does this mean? It means Christ is our righteousness. Kellogg was converted in 1888 under the preaching of Jones and Wagner. And just put it maybe too simply, Jones and Wagner basically said, Jesus is what you need. Jesus is all you need. Righteousness by faith in Jesus answers all your problems. Now, you could word that in ways that would not be helpful, but that was kind of their message. It's like Kellogg took that and he said, if Jesus is all I need, I've got Jesus. I'm good. I can spend my life helping other people because I'm good. Dr. Kellogg, with earnest, untiring energy, has testified by his works that he believes the Word of God and that he is not content to be merely a theoretical believer. He has put his belief into works. He has faith and works combined. In this, he has only tried to walk in the light. And she's saying that in face of criticism and opposition from Adventists, unfortunately. By carelessly neglecting the light, by failing to walk in the light as the Lord has bidden them, our people in Battle Creek have not set a right example. This has been an incentive for Dr. Kellogg to undertake the work they were unwilling to do. He has been doing the work, the very work the Lord has specified should be done. The Lord will give his spirit and favor to those who will work. Please read Isaiah 58. And so Kellogg began doing nice things for people. You know, there are mere mortals like myself and possibly you, and then there are people like Kellogg. And when Kellogg says, I think I feel like I ought to be nice to somebody, he starts an orphanage for, 100 kids. Okay. This is the Haskell Home. It was just outside the west end of Battle Creek, and it was all Kellogg's doing. And incidentally, it was built with a donation, the largest single donation that any entity in the denomination had ever received up to that point, from a Presbyterian. It wasn't even Adventist money that built it. Well, that same year, 1892, he also started the visiting nurses program, funded by a non-Adventist banker in Chicago, whose 17-year-old daughter had come to Battle Creek, spent 6 weeks there, gone back to Chicago for a critical operation. Why they didn't have Kellogg perform the operation, I don't know. He was in the middle of setting a world record for successful operations without a fatality. This was at a time when the moment you would slice into the abdomen, there was a 20 to 25% chance that person was going to die across the table on other surgeons. But she went down to Chicago, had the operation, and the surgeon was unable to do whatever was needed to do. I don't know what her condition was. So they closed her back up and let her come out of anesthesia, and they knew she was going to die. On her deathbed, she had her father. She said, "Daddy, as a memorial to me, I want you to get a nurse from the sanitarium in Battle Creek and bring her here to Chicago to work for the poor people. There are no nurses anywhere on earth like those nurses in the sanitarium." So that was the beginning of the visiting nurses program, which took off and mushroomed from there. And Kellogg was running that. Kellogg also started the Christian Help Bands in early November 1892. Christian Help Band is a very simple concept. It's a group of Christians who are assigned a certain block of town, and their job is to go out and visit everybody in that section of town, find out what their needs are. Are you doing okay? Do you have coal for the winter, Chicago type of thing, or Battle Creek? It's cold, right? Are you staying warm? Do your kids have jackets? Do you have enough food? Is somebody sick? Whatever. That was the Christian Help Band. All started in 1892, and then in late November 1892, we have this statement: "The loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ." And please note the word is revelation, not proclamation. And I argue that it was Kellogg's application of Jones and Wagner's theology that is to be credited with the loud cry. Okay, that was the good Kellogg. Let's see, there's another couple of quick things here. The union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul is the true interpretation of the gospel. The true interpretation of the gospel. The, or the, whichever way you want to pronounce it, is the definite article, right? If I look out the window and I say, "There goes a car," that's the indefinite article, and you would say, "Yawn." There's a road. Cars go past all the time. If I say, "There goes the car," it's assumed that somehow from context, a specific car. Maybe it's the car that you were supposed to catch a ride with and you just missed. That's unfortunate. Maybe it's the car that the bank robbers took off in. I don't know, but somehow in context, it's a specific car. The true interpretation of the gospel. Union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul. If that's the true interpretation, how would I describe all other interpretations? To some degree, not true. To some degree, not true. Okay. The greatest missionary work that can be done in our world is work in ministerial lines combined with medical missionary work. The truth is going forth from the sanitarium at Battle Creek as from no other center in our world. That really is kind of shocking, because by and large, the sanitarium was not nearly as successful as a soul-winning enterprise as it could have been and should have been, okay? But nonetheless, at least the first sentence there is, the greatest missionary work that can be done is this combination. There is nothing that converts the people like the medical missionary work. This work makes the path straight before us and bears the impress that it is of God. Jesus is in the work, and he cannot be hid. Why? Because we are reflecting the character of Jesus, just as he reflected the character of God as we carry on those activities. I have laid out the matter as it has been presented to me. The third angel's message. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Pivot point. Notice the date. This is 1899. 1892, she said, the loud cry has begun. 1899. I have laid out the matter as it has been presented to me. The third angel's message, in the place of swelling into a loud cry, is being smothered. A lot of people have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what happened to the loud cry. Well, I can tell you. It was smothered. This article that this manuscript, the title is The Medical Missionary Work. That's the title of the manuscript. It's being smothered. What was smothering it? Two things. First off was the opposition to the medical work. And secondly, along about, I would put it at, say, 1897 or so, Dr. Kellogg just flat got fed up with all the ministers who were opposing him, and he adopted an attitude of stupid ministers. They're worthless. I'll do it all myself. And so Ellen White says the first smothering aspect was opposition. The second was Kellogg trying to exalt the medical work, which was the right arm of the message, into the whole body. The distortion of this blended ministry of teaching, preaching, helping, healing, the distortion of that is what was smothering the loud cry. Okay, got to go ahead. February 18, 1902, the sanitarium burned to the ground and they needed a bunch of money. Kellogg said, hey, I've just written a book. I will be happy to donate all my proceedings. And so they started down that road. Unfortunately, the book here, this is the Living Temple. Unfortunately, the book was, I won't say permeated, but it certainly had some pantheism in its pages, and that created theological issues and problems. And I just want you to see very quickly how Ellen White regarded the magnitude of those problems, okay? Writing to Dr. Kellogg, no greater deception could be presented to the minds of men than the presentation you have made of God. Souls will be lost to the sowing of the sentiments found in Living Temple. In presenting error, you have united with the Prince of Darkness. When you wrote that book, you were not under the inspiration of God. There was by your side the one who inspired Adam to look at God in a false light. Well, that's obviously Satan, but notice what he did here. He inspired Adam to look at God in a false light. Everything is perceptual, okay? It's always the ability to understand the character of God, and that's what Lucifer did, is he got Adam to look at God in a false light. This whole matter has been presented to me. You have worked as Lucifer worked in the heavenly courts to persuade his associates to unite with him. The enemy has used his arts upon your mind, your boasted study of science, and your assertion that you had obtained something excellent have deceived the men connected with you. Dr. Kellogg has linked up with the great deceiver. He has not realized he has not realized what he was doing any more than the angels who fell realized what they were doing. But he has tempted Satan to tempt him. He has studied hypnotism and spiritualism for the purpose of bringing minds to endorse sentiments that mean a denial of the faith once delivered to the saints. He has not entered upon this work all at once, but by degrees. He has ensnared his own mind and capabilities. He would now resort to any device rather than humble his heart before God and acknowledge his wrong. I have before me such a revival of the first great apostasy in the heavenly courts that I am bowed down with an agony that cannot be expressed. Now, perhaps you see why I started with Lucifer. Because what we've seen so far here is in Lucifer's rebellion, he established the principles and the template of rebellion. In Christ's response, he established the principles and the template, the process, whatever you want to call it, of the divine response. The good Kellogg understood how Christ had worked, and he began doing that, okay? He was converted. He started being nice to people. He started combining faith and works and doing all this united work of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul. And the result was the beginning of the loud cry by 1892. And then, unfortunately, due to opposition from his brethren and his own personal weaknesses, Kellogg flipped the traces. And he went from being the good Kellogg to being the bad Kellogg, introducing pantheism and miscellaneous other heretical elements, and it resulted in the alpha of apostasy. That is all historical. But that is what we can use to understand the plan of the battle. Because the alpha of apostasy obviously has direct implications to the eventual omega of apostasy, and the beginning of the loud cry obviously has implications for the successful completion of the loud cry. Those last two is where we ought to be putting our effort, defensively and offensively, right? Okay. That's where the battle lies today. Satan deceives and corrupts the world, but in so doing, he is only carrying on his original work. He has introduced no new arguments. He has created no new empire of darkness from which to draw supplies for the furtherance of his deceptions. If we understand the past, there's no reason we should be, what's the word I want? Yeah, there's a really great word out there someplace. Anyhow, we shouldn't be caught that much by surprise. That's the word. That's not the word, but that's the idea. If we understand the past, we have nothing to fear for the future, Ellen White says, right? The world needs today, so here we are. What's the plan of the battle? The world needs today what it needed 1,900 years ago, a revelation of Christ. Well, we could up that 100 years since she wrote it, obviously, so we're now 2,000 years ago, a revelation of Christ. That's what the world needs today. How are we going to do that? Jesus isn't here. What the world needs today is the light of Christ's example reflected from the lives of Christ-like men and women. That's how we're going to do that. That's the plan of the battle. The glory of the character of Christ can never be expressed in words. Oh, well, isn't that amazing? Jesus couldn't do it. Oh, surely, but I can because I'm such a smart guy. Give me a break. If Jesus couldn't do it, there's a pretty good chance that you and I can't do it either. Just guessing. The glory of the character of Christ can never be expressed in words. Human language is inadequate to reveal it. It must be made manifest in the life. It is to be manifest in the individual Christian, in the family, in the church, in the ministry of the word, and in every institution established by God's people. That's where the battle lies today. Christ, the great medical missionary, is our example. He healed the sick and preached the gospel. In his service, healing and teaching were linked closely together. Today, they are not to be separated. That's the plan of the battle. So just a kind of a summary of that idea. I'm sorry, I'm not quite done, but I'm getting pretty close. But a summary of that much. God's final work uses the same method that Christ used during his life on earth. The revelation, in addition to the proclamation, right? Proclamation is great. It's not sufficient by itself. But the revelation of the character of God. God's final work requires that human beings take up the same manner of work that Jesus practiced during his life on earth. That's the blending of teaching and preaching, helping and healing. The revelation of God's character cannot be accomplished through words alone. Acts of mercy and healing are also necessary. In short, God's final work is self-sacrifice and self-denial exemplified in medical missionary work. That's the plan of the battle. Fascinating statement. This one coming up. I don't know if it was common around, but in my little church, when I was growing up, I remember this question being posed repeatedly and never intelligently addressed, let alone effectively resolved. The question was, well, if persecution purifies the church, but if the church is Laodicean, why would the devil ever persecute? And so there was supposed to be this great profound problem of, oh, well, how are we ever going to get off of square one? Because we can't purify the church without persecution, but the devil's smart enough not to persecute us. So we're stuck. I never liked that stupid question. It just always struck me as kind of dumb. But it stayed in my head, and I found the answer. I love this statement. This is a great statement. I have been surprised that we have seen so little of the working and manifestation of Satan's wrath. As Lucifer sees that we are making efforts to work the cities as if we meant to give the last message, his wrath will be aroused, and he will employ every device in his power to hinder the work. Now, I'm going to give a little editorial gloss to this. See that part? Where's my little pointer thingy here? There we go, right there. As if we meant. I find that one fascinating. Again, it's like half an inch short of sarcasm. Oh, I didn't use a lot of sarcasm. When Lucifer sees that we're doing it as if we meant to this time. And I'm going to suggest that a possible synonymous structure for that would be to say, what if we follow the directions? When Lucifer sees us making efforts to work the cities and actually following the directions, because isn't that what you would do if you really meant to do the job? Maybe, just maybe we could follow the directions? And what might the directions be? I'm sorry, I don't have the statement. I should have it right there at the bottom of that one. The medical missionary work is the door through which the three angels' message will find access to our large cities. That's the plan of the battle. I find this fascinating. I don't like cities. I'm more of a country boy. It's easy for me to write cities off as incorrigibly corrupt. And probably they are. I'm not very hopeful on cities, but there's a lot of corruption. But Lucifer seems kind of panicked about it. We can do a lot of other things, but when we start working the cities like as if we really mean to do it, he gets freaked out. And that makes me think he's nervous. He's got a lot of unhappy customers in those cities. If we ever showed them something that was actually better, showed them rather than told them, if we revealed the character of the Father, I think Lucifer sees that as his Achilles heel. Fascinating. And so it says, when he sees that we do that, he employs every device in his power to hinder the work. He cuts loose with all the guns. Anybody recognize that? Pathway to Health. I can't tell you which one. I don't remember right now. But Oakland, San Francisco in 2014, San Antonio in 2015, Spokane, 2015. That was the first one I went to. Beckley, West Virginia, 2016. Los Angeles, 2016. Phoenix, 2017. Fort Worth, 2018. There was supposed to be one in the summer of 2020 in Indianapolis along with the General Conference. It didn't happen. You remember why? I think the pandemic is the devil cutting loose with every device he's got. I think this is a literal, actual, honest to goodness, real time, real world, in your face fulfillment of that statement. Right there. We came close to the plan of the battle. Now, don't get me wrong. Pathway to Health, as cool as they were, as much fun as they were, and all the rest, it's not the final answer. It's never going to be the perfect way to take the gospel to all the world. Never, ever. But as I used to tell anybody that would listen, let's just put it that way, the board of the organization, so the best thing that is accomplished here is every time we do one of these things, and we have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 Adventist volunteers, they all go back home with a renewed conviction that it's more blessed to give than to receive. And down on the bottom, these Amen clinics started cropping up. I think it was 12 the first year, 25 the second year, something like that, 38 or something. I don't remember what the numbers just kept ballooning. I think we came pretty close to the plan of the battle. And I think devil reacted. I think that's kind of cool. I don't know, beats just thrashing around in the wilderness all the time. In the character of God's people, a living testimony will be born that will contradict the fallacy of Satan, who has declared that the law of Jehovah is arbitrary. You may have wondered, 7, 8, 9, those last three accusations, why do I think they're still on the table? Because they all were waiting to be addressed. And here's how it's going to happen. Law of Jehovah is arbitrary and holds its subject under cruel bondage. The character of God's people, a living testimony. What kind of a testimony might that be? Well, I would suggest it's the revelation of the character of the Father through the same means that Jesus did, through a combined work of preaching, teaching, helping, healing. Medical missionary work, self-denial, self-sacrifice. That's what we were talking about this morning that you can be happy about, by the way. Remember? You can be happy when you see the value of self-denial and self-sacrifice. And that is the plan of the battle. The Lord desires through his people to answer Satan's charges by showing the results of obedience to right principles. You know, there's a whole bunch that I will not even touch with my fingernails right now that could be said about this issue of the law being arbitrary. But notice this part right here. Arbitrary is because I said so. And the alternative to arbitrary is something that doesn't depend on someone saying so. Now, if you stop and if I asked you, I said, can you think of any laws that don't come from somebody saying this is what the law is? Well, let's see. Dog license. Oh, no, no, somebody said that. Speed limit. No, somebody said tax brackets. No, somebody said that. Can you think of any laws that don't come from Congress or the king or Parliament or City Hall or the teacher or the principal of the school? You know, whatever it is, or mom and dad, right? Okay. Can you think of any laws? And the other kind of law is that one. It doesn't depend on what somebody says. You can argue about it. You know, I think gravity's a little bit too strong. A lot of the kids down at the playground, they've been getting the skinned knees thing. I don't think that's good. We should protect our babies. Let's repeal the law of gravity a little bit back from 9.8 meters per second. Let's make it 9.4. Well, go ahead and try. Have a happy day. It ain't going to work. It's not an arbitrary law. And this statement right here, the Lord desires to show his people to answer Satan's charges by showing the results. Results. That's the law of cause and effect. That's the law, that's the language of physics. Those who endeavor to obey all the commandments of God can honor him only as they have a right conception of his character, government, and purposes and act in accordance with them. That's a part of the plan of the battle, too. And I think it's important. I don't think the work is done. I'll just be honest. I don't think I understand. I can't adequately explain accusations 7 and 8. But what's interesting to me is that accusations 7 and 8, the law is arbitrary and the law makes forgiveness impossible. Those are both intricately tied to us, human beings. And I can show you about 25 statements where after the demonstration of Christ on the cross, the government of heaven is entirely secure. The universe has signed off. They are good. The only issue that remains is God's proposed plan of taking people like you and me to heaven. That's what 7 and 8 are aimed at. There's one statement, I shared this with Tony the other night, where it says that the rest of the universe would be just as happy if God were to destroy every sinner and destroy the earth, recreate it, and people it with somebody who would honor him. They don't actually need us. And they probably have, I sure hope they have questions. Just think about this. God is proposing to take guilty, participatory, born-in-sin sinners take them to heaven, put them on the throne of God, right? He that overcometh shall sit down with me on my throne as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne, and make them immortal. Let's touch that one for just a second. How many, according to the Bible, who all has immortality? What's the Bible verse? God alone hath immortality. Is Gabriel immortal? No, he's not immortal. Is he going to live forever? As long as he doesn't sin, yes. But Gabriel and Lucifer belong to the same class. Lucifer's not immortal. He's not going to spend all eternity burning in hell. And here we are, human beings, guilty, participatory sinner human beings, and Jesus says to Gabriel, I want to bring him up, put him in mansions, put him on the throne, and just coincidentally make it so we can't get rid of them if we want to. You think that might raise a question or two? I'm thinking that should raise some questions. Let's finish up. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions for their own sake, which is a polite way of saying, if you're not an idiot, you'll do this. Okay? So, for their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. And those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those who know not the truth. There has been talk in certain jurisdictions of limiting health care to those who have opted to accept the vaccinations. Now, you can argue that issue. I'm not going to go into that issue right now, but I'll tell you this much. If the vaccine-free are ever denied health care at a hospital, you will have just created a monstrously large black market for unlicensed medical care. And some people, apparently the smart ones, will be intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. And they will find a field of labor anywhere. Satan will come in to deceive, if possible, the very elect. He claims to be Christ, and he is coming in pretending to be the great medical missionary. Here's the point of that. At the end of time, there is the loud cry, which is built on the same model and template as Christ's work, right? Medical missionary work. There is also the omega of apostasy, which is built on the model and template of Satan's principles, and it's going to look like medical missionary work. Because making counterfeit $20 bills that don't look like $20 bills is kind of stupid. And he's coming in, pretending to be the great medical missionary work, medical missionary. Now that's not just when Satan himself appears as Christ. That goes on before. Wonderful scenes with which Satan will be closely connected will soon take place. God's word declares that Satan will work miracles. He will make people sick and then will suddenly remove from them his satanic power. They will then be regarded as healed. These works of apparent healing will bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test. Many who have had great light will fail to walk in the light because they have not become one with Christ. His instruction is not palatable to them. What a fascinating word to put right there. Palatable. I don't know, it doesn't taste good. So how could works of apparent healing bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test? And what is this thing about palatability? Well, Satan can present a counterfeit so closely resembling the truth that it deceives those who are willing to be deceived. Now that sounds a little dumb. How many people are going to say, oh, pick me, I want to be deceived? Doesn't sound... Nah, really? Who would be willing to be deceived? One last stroke from the English teacher. What do we call these little guys? The 3 dots. Ellipses. Yes, that is an ellipsis, right? And plural is ellipses. Okay. That means there's more to come. And that comma, just before that, is kind of a good clue that we've got another apostrophe phrase, which is another definition of the substantive that just came before. So what do you suppose it means to be willing to be deceived? That's all it takes. To be willing to be deceived. What do you suppose they might find unpalatable about Christ's teaching? I suggest self-denial and self-sacrifice. That's in great controversy, for crying out loud. How could I read that for 30 years and not see that? Okay. This all makes sense, zooming out to the big picture, because, in very fact, the foundation of Christ's mission was self-denial and self-sacrifice, and selfishness lies at the foundation of all sin. That's just the way it is. That's the issues of the great controversy. And the last 2, 7 and 8. Now, bear in mind, accusation number 9 that God was lying. Well, God's already been proven right on the first 6. When he's proven right on 7 and 8, number 9 just kind of evaporates, right? The focus of our attention needs to be the claim that the law is arbitrary and the claim that the law makes forgiveness impossible. And the plan of the battle to refute that is the character of God reflected in the lives of Christ-like men and women, carrying on the same work that he did, which was a blended teaching of preaching, teaching, helping, and healing, and self-sacrifice. And those miracles are medical missionary work stripped of self-denial and self-sacrifice. Because how hard is it to work a miracle? It takes a lot less time than doing a whole batch of fomentations. It doesn't require you to restrict your appetite. It doesn't require that you do anything. Just, what was it Naaman said? Clap your hands and I'll be healed. Okay. Questions, comments, complaints, right? Feel free to contact me, set me straight. I appreciate being enlightened on things that I haven't figured out yet. And incidentally, I didn't speak up on this before. I saw a few people taking pictures of particular quotations and things. That's cool. If that fills your need, that's great. If you want all the slides, send me an email. Just ask for the slides, send you all the slides, no problem. Let's see. The only other thing I might say, and this is shamelessly self-serving, I suppose, but basically everything in this talk could be found in my book, Tactics, which is available from Remnant Publications and some Adventist book centers that carry it, but I don't have any idea around here. So, anyhow, let's bow our heads for prayer. Father, we are thankful that you have a plan of the battle, that you have invested the time, effort, and self-denial and self-sacrifice on your own part to actually have a way to deal with this mess. We pray that you would be with us, help us to understand the plan, help us to accept the conditions of enlistment in your army. We pray you'll go with us, keep us through this coming week, make us witnesses for you, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.